And a very good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to our HR for UK Friday afternoon webinar. I can see there are still a couple of attendees still busy registering, so I will just chat a little bit, giving those individuals a chance to sort of get on and not to miss the most important part of the webinar today. For those of you who have struggled to get on before, thank you for being patient with us. We're dealing with software from over the pond, and of course they don't understand our timings. So we know that we have got and we have had a lot of issues in relation to the times. Some people have actually missed it completely. So I'm really delighted to see that we've got quite a lot of registrants who are busy logging on. So again, that's really, really good news. So I'm glad that we have found a way to work around these gremlins that we are faced and challenged to deal with while we are all on, I want to say lockdown. We're starting to come out of lockdown, but while we've all had to sort of come together with different ways and means of, communicating with everybody. I think the attendees have settled down a little bit. So after that few-minute rush to get on, my webinar today is about the new or the old scheme and which furlough scheme is the one that you should be using and why you should be using it. So just a quick reminder, I'm Angela Clay and I'm an HR and employment law specialist at HR for UK. HR for UK are a leading provider for HR and employment, payroll, pensions, health and safety services to businesses. We've got over 30 years of experience, and we've got some fantastic 5-star reviews on our website. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already been on our website, to go and have a read for yourself what our clients say about us and how they value our services. So again, if you haven't been to our website, it's www.hrforuk.com. So again, please do go on there. It is filled with lots of reviews. It's also filled with lots of information, you will be bound to find what you're looking for there. So just again, by way of introduction, Angela Clay, as an HR and employment law solicitor. I'm the Managing Director of HR for UK, and I'm responsible for leading HR for UK by providing you with clear professional HR support and services to UK businesses. I've said this so many times and it still remains the case. My vision is to make sure that your businesses come out of this crisis successfully, and I will be doing that by providing you with clear, professional, practical advice and support, and of course always being there for when you are needed. So when just been sort of stumbled a little bit, just a reminder that on the right hand side of your screen you should have a dashboard where you are able to ask questions. I'm delighted to be able to see that there are quite a few questions in there already. I had a quick sneak peek, so Charles, thank you very much for asking the questions. I promised to get to them today. I have made sure that I don't run over in time, so we can get to those all-important question and answers. But don't forget, this webinar is recorded, so you will be able to go to it after, today's live session. So if you want to recap and see what there is, of course, as always, we will collate all those questions and answers, and they will be sent out to you together with our slide deck, which will come out to you in the next day or two. So please do ask those questions. It's really, really important. This is your webinar. I want to make sure that you can get the best out of it, and the way you can get the best out of it is to ask those questions. Of course, if there's anything that you specifically want to know about or want us to cover webinars that we haven't done before, please drop it into the questions, drop it into our communications. We will be happy and delighted to hear from you. So just a quick reminder that you can contact us through our website, which is www.hrforuk.com. You can drop me an email at angela. Oh no, I'm giving you the wrong email address, at info.hrforuk hrforuk.com, and also you can get in contact with us by telephone, which is 01455 444 222, and ask to speak to one of my colleagues who will be able to help you. So moving on to today, the scheme, there are three key areas that I'm going to be covering this afternoon: the old scheme versus the new scheme. I'm going to help you learn which one is going to be the best for your business and why. I'm going to help you understand what the changes are and when those key changes are going to be taking place, because there are two different, there are a lot of dates, and there are really important key dates, because if you're going to miss those dates, then you're going to find yourself you know, on the wrong scheme or not being able to claim at all. And then we're going to just also have a look at what options are available to you. So let's just quickly recap on what we already know about the furlough scheme. So the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme has got a couple of different names. So we know it as its full name, which is the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. We know it as the Furlough Scheme. We also now know it as the Flexible Furlough Scheme. We know it as Phase 1 Scheme, and we also know it as Phase 2 Scheme. All of them mean exactly the same thing. It's just an iteration on the name and how it has evolved over time. So we know that on the 20th of March of this year, which seemed like a very long time ago, the Chancellor announced the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme for the first time. During that announcement, the Chancellor announced that the government would be supporting businesses, and they committed to pay 80% of furloughed workers' wages up to a cap of £2,500 per month. A furloughed worker, just as a quick reminder, is someone who remains employed but is not provided or required to carry out any work. The aim of the scheme was to support businesses and, of course, individuals, but it was primarily for businesses to support them in times when they couldn't pay wages, and it was used as a stepping stone to try and avoid redundancies as a result of businesses not being able to pay wages. The scheme was originally available until the 31st of May, and I know certainly from my point of view, when it was announced in March, May seemed a long time away, and of course the 31st of May has come and gone. On the 12th of May, the scheme was extended to the end of October. And then again, on the 29th of May, the Chancellor announced some further changes to the scheme. And the big change that he announced on the 29th of May was the introduction of the Flexible Furlough Scheme. So that was a real big step change for the scheme. And again, what I'm going to be covering quite a bit today is what those changes are, when those changes take effect, and what it's going to mean for your business. So I am going to be putting out a big health warning at the moment. We are expecting changes with further guidance to the Flexible Furlough Scheme. We are expecting those guidances to come out next Friday. So what I'm going to be saying today, I heavily caveat that it is probably going to change. We don't expect the changes that we had the first time round, because I think we know what we're doing, but I do anticipate that there are going to be different iterations of the Flexible Furlough Scheme, particularly providing some further guidance on what we can and what we can't do, because again, you know, we don't know what that is because it actually hasn't come to life yet. So like everything, it's normally once we start using it where we see all these changes that need to be made to make the scheme a better scheme. The scheme is open to all UK employers. That hasn't changed. As long as you had a PAYE scheme and you designated your employees as furloughed workers. Employers have access to a government grant. It is a grant. We don't need to pay that money back. But it was the grant is to be able to provide furlough workers their salaries, potentially to protect them from redundancies. Now, I know, and I'll cover this a little bit later, that in the real scheme of things, we are probably facing a much different landscape, which is going to dictate what business owners are going to have to do going forward. So I will come back to that, but primarily I want to focus on these two different schemes today. So just a quick reminder before I go on to that, the scheme, as we know, ends at the 31st of October, but a very big alert to everyone. The entrance to the furlough scheme, whether it's new, whether it's old, really ends on the 10th of June. That's next Wednesday. So I really want you to think about what you are going to be needing to do for your business, not just now, but in weeks to come. We are looking not just, next week, June, July, we're looking November, October, November, December, when we really need to know what we're going to be able to do, because of course we know categorically that the furlough scheme will not be extended any further than the 31st of October. So we really need to be planning after that and make sure that your business is ready and prepared for that. So just a quick recap on what furlough is. We all know that pre-COVID-19 pandemic, a furloughed worker, or the furlough concept, did not exist in employment law in the UK, and it was it carries no meaning. There is certainly no case law, there is no information about it, but it was introduced in response to COVID-19 pandemic and how that was going to have an impact on UK businesses. It is a temporary concept that was introduced. Whether that becomes a more permanent concept that we will be able to rely on in the future, we will have to wait and see. But generally, the word furlough means temporary leave of absence. And we know that the fundamental employment law principles still apply when we are dealing with furlough. As I say, it's been temporarily introduced into employment law, and it basically keeps employees on payroll without them having to carry out work on reduced pay. Now, at the moment, anybody who is on the furlough scheme, they are not allowed to work. So it was quite clear under the original scheme that employees must not work for their employer while they're on furlough leave. And the meaning of work was defined as providing a service or generating a revenue for that employer. That definition, that concept will change from the 1st of July when the flexible furlough scheme is introduced. So just a reminder that, of course, being on furlough leave is different to being laid off, and it is also, being laid off and getting layoff pay, and it is different to actual redundancy. With furlough, the employee rights continue to are preserved, so they will continue to accrue holiday, and they will continue to, their continuous employment will continue, so continuation will not be broken by an employee being on furlough. Those are quite important, and again, I'll touch on those as we get to further on in the webinar when I start talking about some fundamentals that you need to be aware of. So again, furlough employees was designed to support employers who were affected by COVID-19, and it was viewed, and it continues to be viewed, as an option when businesses are reviewing their business needs. So it is an option, but of course it is not a continual option, because we know that that's going to come to an end. Just a quick reminder, eligibility for employers, eligibility has not changed. For the new scheme, you have to be an eligible employer to be able to apply and claim through that grant. So the scheme is open to all UK organisations who have set up a PAYE payroll and is running it before the 28th of February 2020, and must have submitted an RTI submission to HMRC on or before the 19th of March. And of course, you need a UK bank account. Just a tip that any claims relating to employees who have been on furlough, they must have been on furlough leave for at least 3 weeks under the old scheme. Under the new scheme, that minimum period is 1 week. So again, I'm going to come into that a little bit later in my webinar. Just also a reminder that there is a clear deadline for claims to be made. for the old scheme and the new scheme. Claims on the current scheme have to be finalised, for the period ending June. You need to make that claim by the 31st of July. So again, I will remind you of all these key dates, and some of them, it may sound like I'm going to be sounding like a stuck record, but I can't stress the importance on how important those key dates are. So again, let's just have a look at eligibility of employees. Again, eligibility for employees has not changed for the new scheme. So furloughed employees must have been on your PAYE payroll with an RTI that has been submitted to HMRC on or before the 19th of March. And this will include full-time workers, employees, part-time employees. It includes agency employees who are on agency contracts. It also includes 0-hour contracts. So again, those individuals are eligible to be on the furlough scheme. When you put workers and employees onto the furlough scheme, it is a change, a variation of terms, and changing the status of employees is always subject to current employment law principles. So again, making those changes, making sure that you follow those procedural steps to do that is absolutely key and is important. So again, whilst we've talked about eligible employees, of course they must have agreed to have been furloughed, and as your responsibility as an employer, you must have given them the agreement in writing, so that they can make sure that you've got a record of that, and an absolute reminder, records of those agreements, that notification must be kept for 5 years. So it's unlikely that an employee would have refused to have gone on to furlough. That being said, there are a couple of businesses that I have actually advised on where an employee was refusing to be furloughed. But of course, the alternative to that is redundancy. And as soon as that was made evident to the employee, it comes as no surprise that they did actually decide to be furloughed after all. But the employee must agree to it, and we must have a written record of that. So we've talked about the written record. We will need to reissue furlough agreements under the flexible furlough scheme, and I'm going to come to that in a little bit more detail, because of course when we produced and anybody who provided the original furlough schemes, depending on what version you were on, we had no idea at that point in time that there was going to be a flexible scheme that was going to be coming in place. So none of the existing agreements have any reference to the flexible scheme. So anybody who has issued them and that are going to be putting employees onto the flexible scheme, you will need to provide them with an updated agreement. And before you all go rushing to our website, it's not there yet. We're still busy working on it, but as soon as it is available, we will let you know. Again, we're just waiting for those guidances to come out on the 12th of June, so we can make sure that we don't end up having too many iterations of that final agreement. So again, it's really important because, having them on the flexible furlough agreement, there is a reduction in pay, which of course we all know is a variation of terms. So it's really important to have that document and that agreement in place. So employers must stop employees working before the end of June. So if you are wanting to use an employee who has never been furloughed before, and you want to use them, or you think you want to use them, or you may want to use them on the flexible furlough scheme between 1st of July and the 31st of October, they will need to stop working and be put onto furlough by the 10th of June. If you miss the date of the 10th of June, you will not be able to take advantage of the flexible furlough scheme, and you will have to carry the financial burden of having to pay that part-time costs. So really, really important. If you are thinking of putting an employee who's never been furloughed before, you need to do that by next Wednesday, and they have to be furloughed for that minimum 3-week period, which needs to be completed by the end of June. So that's really, really important. Of course, when you come to make your claim under the flexible furlough scheme, the government has put in anti-fraud measures, so you will not be able to make a claim for more employees than what you have on the original scheme. So for example, over the period from March to the end of June, for example, you put 10 employees on furlough over a period of time, and suddenly you're making a claim for 15 employees. It is going to be rejected. It will be identified that you are claiming for more employees than what you originally had on the original scheme. So there are anti-fraud measures in place. So, you know, it is important for you to take those steps now if you are going to be using those employees on the flexible furlough scheme. So, of course, there are complexities that are going to arise for individuals who weren't on furlough before the 10th of June. I think I've covered that, so I'm not going to go over it again. And of course, if you're still not sure, put it into those questions, which I can see are expanding as things go along. So that's really good news. But of course, even though we're going to have this flexible furlough scheme come into play, there's still going to be issues around individuals who are shielding. Now, we know that shielding is coming to the end because originally it was for a 12-week period. A lot of that is now coming to the end, but there is still shielding for those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. Now, the reality is those individuals are probably not in employment, but you might well have individuals who are classified as clinically extremely vulnerable, and they must remain shielded. They can stay on the original ordinary scheme. They can stay on, and you can continue to claim for their full, you know, the full 80% on under the current scheme for all their hours that they would normally have worked. It also, there are complexities around those who are on unpaid leave. So, for example, there's work to be done, and you have individuals who have decided to go off on unpaid leave. There are complexities around those, and you must start thinking about those, whether it might be beneficial to put them onto the furlough scheme so that you can get them back in on part-time, because maybe that was what the issue was at the time. Of course, don't forget about those who were made redundant, recently made redundant. There are complexities about those who are pregnant or who are on maternity leave, adoption, paternity, or shared parental leave. There is also still this big issue and big concern about those who have caring responsibilities, particularly for those who have got children, because we know that while some schools have opened, there is still a large proportion of children that can't go back to school because the schools aren't opening for that age group. And of course, there are complexities around migrant workers. Sick leave, just a reminder that sick leave, COVID-19 sick leave is separate and is not the coronavirus job retention scheme. It will not apply under the new furlough, the new flexible furlough scheme. Sick remains sick, sick remains claimable under the coronavirus statutory sick pay scheme. And just a quick reminder that that is a maximum claim of 7 days for someone who is symptomatic, and it is 14 days for someone who is living with someone who is symptomatic or has coronavirus, regardless of whether they've got symptoms or not. So we've got those two periods. Don't confuse them. Those principles still stay exactly the same as what they were under the original scheme. So just a reminder, the scheme as in its current form will come to an end on the 31st of June. And that is the point where on the 1st of July, when the new flexible furlough scheme is implemented. The old scheme does still exist, but you won't be able to put new people onto the old scheme. So you won't be able to claim for all of their hours from the 1st of July. You will only be able to claim for part of their hours. The scheme has been extended until the end of October, and it's you know, we're going to go through the step-by-step changes of the phased change to the scheme. I think I've laboured the point. But I'm just going to remind you one more time, the final date in which an employer can furlough an employee for the first time is the 10th of June. If you're anything like me, the days are merging into one. Monday feels like Friday, Friday feels like Monday. It's next Wednesday is the 10th of June. So do make sure that if you haven't furloughed an employee, that you do so, especially if it's going to be their first time. New entrants closes on the 30th of June, but there must have been that 3-week completed period of furlough to qualify to continue to be eligible under the schemes. It's under both schemes. Anybody who is furloughed, you must keep a record on when and how that individual was furloughed and under what terms. So as I said before, this is a top tip. Start thinking about the future months. Start thinking about between July and October, but also start thinking from November and beyond. So there are lots of individuals where you may want to bring them in, you may want to still take advantage of the various schemes. So start thinking a little bit further than just the here and now. Right, so from the 1st of July, employers are restricted from using the current scheme. You can only be furloughed on the new scheme on part-time claims. So again, I think I've laboured the point on when you need to do something. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift my focus from the changes, but I'm going to specifically drill down now into the flexible furlough scheme. So this is got a couple of different names. It's phase 2 of the scheme. It's called the new scheme. It's the new coronavirus scheme or the flexible furlough scheme. They're all the same thing, and it's what the scheme looks like from the 1st of July. So from the 1st of July, employers will have flexibility to bring previously furloughed employees back into work on a part-time basis. The government will continue to commit to pay 80% of wages for the normal hours that they would work, and of course, this flexible scheme has come in 1 month earlier than what was originally planned. Originally, it was planned for August, but because as lockdown is being eased and more and more businesses are opening, it was felt that it was needed to be brought forward. Some feel that it's not soon enough, but I think with the changes that needed to be implemented and put in place, it's given business owners a month to think about how they want to implement that flexibility. So the great thing about the flexible scheme is that you as the employer can decide the hours that the employees are going to be working. You can decide the shift patterns that you want to work, and you will be able to dictate how that is going to look and work for your business. Of course, you would have had many employees who would have been full-time employees, part-time employees. They would have worked set hours. With the furlough scheme, you can decide when they're going to work, how long they are going to work for, whether it's going to be flexible over the whole week. So for example, whether it's going to be mornings only, afternoons only, or whether it's just going to be a couple of hours on one day, a couple of hours on another day. It is really flexible to suit your business needs. The only thing that you will need to do is you will need to ensure that you communicate that to your workers so that they know when they actually really need to turn up for work. So it's really, really flexible to be able to allow you to dictate. You can flex up, you can flex down, you can dip your toe in the water to see how it's going to be, and you can take it on a step-by-step basis. But of course, you know, if you have listened to previous webinars that I've had, planning is key. Planning is so important in having a clear communication plan to employees. So take the time out just to think about, how do you think it is going to work? If I had a crystal ball here, I'll be able to look into it and tell you how to do it, but of course we don't. And the million-dollar question is, how is this really going to work for my business? How many employees am I going to need? But the beauty is, as I've said, you can flex up and you can flex down. There is only one caveat to that. Any period of returning to work has to be for a minimum of a week's period. So it might be that you have an employee coming in on flexible working for 1 day, and then the 4 days they are on furlough again. It may well be that you're going to bring them in 2 days and they're on furlough for 3 days. How that's going to look is going to be down to you. There is no minimum time that you can furlough staff. So that means you can actually bring somebody in for as little as 1 hour's worth of work. Now, probably that would be not beneficial to anybody because you'd hardly be in and you'd be leaving again, but there is no minimum time that you are required for employees to be in. So again, there is no minimum period that you can furlough staff for. Again, just a reminder that you will need to engage and enter into a new flexible furlough agreement. As soon as we have got that available, we will let you know, so that you can access it from our website, and make sure that you share that with your employees. So again, you can choose when to make your claims. So you can make claims for a longer period. So whilst your employees might be coming back in on flexible time, so just be consistent with an example. So if, for example, they are coming in for 2 days and you are going to be furloughing them for 3 days, that is a week. It's a week period. You can carry on with that and you can make the claim for that weekly period. Do remember that claims, you can only make 1 claim per claim period. So the claim period is per month. So again, give it some thought as to when and how you are going to make those claims. So again, generally speaking, those of you who have been making claims, you have made those claims either just before you are about to make a payroll run, or when you're actually processing that payroll. So again, keep it as close as possible to your payroll. So again, your claim periods can be done monthly or on 2 weekly cycles if you prefer. That will change on how the claims are made once we get into August, September, October, and I'll cover that in a little bit more detail on how that's going to work in a little bit later. So when you are making those claims, you will have to submit data to HMRC on the usual hours the employee would normally work, so what their normal expected contractual hours are. You would need to submit what hours they've actually worked, and you would need to submit the furlough hours so that the government can make that contribution on the furloughed hours. So just a reminder again, even if you are going to be using the flexible furlough scheme, there are potentially going to be some employees that will be unable to return to work. You may not have work for them. They can remain on furlough and you can continue to claim the grant for their full hours under the existing rules and under the existing scheme. Employees must continue to receive 80% of their salary, even as we start going into the phased reduction from the government's contribution. At all times, the employee must receive no less than 80% of their wages, of course, subject to the cap of £2,500 per month. And of course, as we start getting into this phased reduction of contribution from the government, there is that natural expectation that employers will need to share the burden of those costs. So again, I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. Of course, under the flexible furlough scheme, you can still decide if you want to top it up to 100% of wages, if it's feasible for you to do so. There is no obligation for you to do it, so don't feel that you have to, but if you wanted to, you can. Again, the government, whilst they've introduced, the reduction, the capped figures are applied in proportion to the hours that are not worked. So the cap applies to the furloughed hours. So the calculations, if we thought they were quite complicated, when it was fairly straightforward, hold on to your seats, about to get a lot more complicated. So, there is always help available, so don't feel that you are on your own. So I've talked a lot about the flexible scheme, so let's have a look in a little bit more detail in the timeline for the flexible scheme. There are 5 stages to this latter part of the furlough scheme, and I'm going to go through it month by month. I apologise if I'm going to be repeating what I've said before, but I can't stress the importance on the dates that I'm going to be sharing with you. So please don't lose faith with me. Please don't get bored. I promise you it'll be for your benefit by the end of it, because you will come to a date and you'll think, what was that date Angela was referring to? So let's get on to those 5 stages. So from June, the 10th of June, the furlough scheme is effectively going to close for employees who have not been previously furloughed. Until the 30th of June, employers can still claim 80% of furloughed workers' current salaries or wages up to £2,500. Up until the end of June, employees must not work for their employer. National insurance contributions and auto-enrolment payments can still be claimed back as part of the scheme, so you get that grant for that. Employers are not required to contribute anything towards furloughed employees' wages for the month of June. So that's June. Let's fast forward to July. July is the first step change in the scheme. So the flexible scheme becomes available to employees who were previously furloughed. So they have to have been on the furlough scheme either currently or at some point between the 20th of March and the 1st of July. So as long as they have been on the furlough scheme at some point, you will be able to put them onto the flexible furlough scheme. So employees will be able to return part-time. Employers can still claim the grant for the normal hours that are not worked. Of course, employees, the hours that they do work, you as the employer will need to pay for those hours. So the amount of time, work, and any shift patterns, it's down to you to agree. But of course, this can vary from week to week. So as I mentioned earlier, you can try a certain shift pattern and hours one week, and you can change it the next week, as long as it's the same for one period of a week. So until the 31st of July, you can still claim 80% of the furlough employees' wages of a cap up to £2,500. As I've already mentioned, you can claim the national insurance contributions and pension contributions for those furloughed hours. The contributions only apply to the hours that the employee has not worked against the hours that they would normally have been required to work in accordance with their contractual terms. So again, we're going to be having contractual hours, worked hours, and furloughed hours, and I'll refer to those as we go through today's webinar. So that's July. August is when it's going to start having a financial impact on businesses. So August, there is, as I say, another step change. The main change from August is that employers will have to start making a contribution. That contribution is going to be the national insurance and pension contributions. You will no longer be able to claim them back through the any of the schemes, whether they're on the original scheme or whether they are on the flexible scheme. So from August, you will have to pay the national insurance contributions and the auto enrolment contributions. Now, some businesses will find that that is an acceptable level of contribution. There has been lots of talk that that actually equates to about 5% of the wage bill, which could be quite significant for some businesses that don't have income coming in. So again, do bear that in mind. From August, it's going to have an impact on your financial position. You will still be able to, so the government in August will still pay the 80% of furloughed workers' wages up to a cap of £2,500 for the hours that they have worked. So again, the employer's funding on employers' national insurance and pension contributions will apply to both the hours worked and the hours not worked. So again, there's two elements there. So again, quite a big step change. As I said, if you thought calculating what can be and can't be claimed, it's about to get a lot more complicated. So that's August. We're now going to move on to September, which is the fourth step change. So from the 1st of September to the 30th of September, the government will pay 70% of a furloughed employee's wages up to a cap of £2,187.50 for the hours not worked. Employers will have to pick up the 10% of wages so that the employee still gets a minimum of 80% of their wages up to a cap of £2,500, including paying the employer's national insurance contributions and auto enrollment pension contributions. So again, that is the give or take 5% that I talked about earlier, plus the 10%. So it's starting to gain financial momentum. From October comes the final change to the scheme. So from the 1st of October to the 31st of October, the government contribution will be 60% of wages up to a cap of £1,875 for the hours that the employee does not work. The employer will have to pick up the 20% of wages to make sure that the employee receives no less than 80% of their wages up to a cap of £2,500, and you will also have to pick up the employer national insurance contributions and the auto enrollment contributions for both the hours worked and the furloughed hours. So quite a big financial impact being phased in over the next few months. From November, there is no more government support. So from November, the entire wage bill becomes your liability and responsibility. So you need to bear that in mind when you are factoring in what your plans are for your business. Again, just capping on a couple of things, how to agree which employees to take onto the flexible scheme. It's down to you, it's your decision. There is no criteria that you have to go through deciding which employees should be furloughed, which employees should go on the flexible scheme. That is entirely down to you. But of course, make sure you check that any furlough agreements that you have in place have the new flexible scheme as part of that, because the original agreements wouldn't have had it, because of course at that time the flexible scheme didn't exist. So let's have a look at some practical points. I've already touched on the agreements. Make sure that that is introduced, employees signed, record is kept, and you keep it for 5 years. Make sure if you're going to be putting employees onto the furlough scheme that they stop working by the 10th of June. Think about employees who have perhaps taken on another job while they have been furloughed. I know this was quite a topic of discussion, but again, you know, they might be working somewhere else. If you're wanting to get them back part-time, that may have an impact. So again, look at notice, reasonable notice to get workers back in. So again, those same basic principles will apply. I've already talked about the anti-fraud measure that the government has implemented to make sure that employers can only claim for those that have previously been furloughed. So any claims for the months between July and October must not exceed the maximum number of claims previously under the original scheme. And of course, you know, the flexible scheme still remains an alternative possibility for redundancy, but it is possibly that redundancy is just being delayed while you use the furlough scheme. Normal employment law principles apply, particularly in relation to equality, discrimination. So do be aware of those when you are making any decisions relating to you know, employees. Timing of making claims, I think I've covered a lot of this in what I've mentioned before. I'm getting quite keen that we're getting to 3:45, and I haven't got to that all-important Q&As, and I know there's lots of questions in there. So the timing of claims, the only thing that I will sort of mention there, and again, I have covered it before, is you will need to have made your claims for your ordinary, the existing scheme by the 31st of July. So all of those who are furloughed in June, you must make those June claims by the 31st of July. So that's another key date to remember. From August, you will have to make the claim from July, you will have to make the claim for the period in which you're doing, because you're dealing with different schemes. So the flexibility comes in July. August, it starts getting more complicated because you will need to separate out what your claim is looking like. Those who are on, where you're making the national insurance contributions, you won't be able to claim that. Don't forget. So claim August in August, claim September in September, and claim October in October. That way you will not get the different claims confused with the different periods on which they fall. Again, when you come to make your claim, you're going to need to keep those all-important records on how those calculations are made. We have provided guidance and support, so anybody who's not too sure on how to make those calculations or what is included, what isn't, do come back to us. We will be more than happy to help and assist you. Again, working, I've touched on that during the course of today's webinar, of those who must not work. So until the end of June, furloughed workers must not work. From the 1st of July, they can. The calculation of pay, so how do you calculate that 80% of pay? That has not changed. That is exactly the same as what it was under the original scheme. So again, just to remind you that calculating pay is 80% of regular wages, fees, compulsory bonuses, compulsory commissions must be included. When you, discretionary bonuses, discretionary commission, tips, non-cash payments, use of a company vehicle, that is all excluded. That hasn't changed. That is still the same as what it was before. So just a quick reminder for regular salaried employees, it's what their salary, their actual salary was as at the 19th of March. For those who are on variable pay, it'll be the higher of the same month's earning in 2019 or the average earnings for the period of 2019-2020. It's whichever is the higher. Of course, if an employee has been with you for less than a year, it will be the average earnings for the time that they had actually worked for you. And of course, for workers who started partway through February, the wage will be taken on a pro rata basis. So there are lots of changes, that have been implemented. Use the scheme, the existing scheme and the flexible working scheme. If you are going to be making those redundancies, you know that your business is not going to be able to sustain having the level of workforce. You're not going to be able to sustain that increased salary overhead cost. You might need to start about making those very difficult decisions where you need to start making redundancies, plan changes, start thinking about those. If you are going to be going through the redundancy process, I would absolutely advise you to get help and support in doing so. I was on a webinar earlier this week where we were talking to the employment judge, the president of the employment tribunals, and he was really sort of emphasizing that they are anticipating a peak, a spike in unfair dismissal claims arising out of redundancies. So whilst redundancies are a process, what is absolutely critically important is making sure that that process is fair, and that a fair and proper process is actually carried out. So don't fall foul of process just because you want to rush it. I can't emphasize enough not to do that. There is help. We can help you. Don't try and cut corners. It's not worth it in the end. But looking at redundancy, I went off down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. If you are going to be using the scheme for redundancy, you can serve notice during the scheme, where the government will still contribute the 80% towards the notice pay. Of course, notice pay needs to be their normal remuneration, so you will need to top up their notice pay by that 20% so that they get their normal pay, but you will be able to claim back that 80% through the schemes, which is really beneficial from a cost perspective for businesses. Likewise, use the schemes for holiday. If you are asking an employee to use up their holiday during the furlough schemes, again, you have to pay them their normal remuneration for holiday pay, but again, you can claim back that 80% or the 60 or the 70%, depending on when you're doing it. You know, you will still be able to claim that aspect of it. So when you're looking about the contributions that are coming, it's really beneficial for you to be looking at it now. Use June, use July as an opportunity to request employees to use up accrued but not yet taken holiday to help you with that cash flow. And of course, if you are going to be using June and July for redundancy processes, make sure you build in those notice periods and notice pay so you can take full advantage of that. Just a little flag, if you are going to be using the furlough scheme for notice, don't, even if it's in the contract, don't use the pile-on clause. A pile-on is payment in lieu of notice, because that is a discretionary payment and you will not be able to claim that back. So the employee, you will leave them on furlough leave during the notice period. Likewise, if you have somebody who is going to be working out their notice period, be extremely mindful of their length of service, because if their 2 years qualifying period tips over during that notice period, they will be entitled to a full and proper redundancy process. Don't get caught short by not being mindful of all the facts and details at the time. So I'm really going to sort of whistle stop recap on the flexible furlough scheme, and then I'm going to go to those Q&As. So the new furlough scheme, employers will be able to claim the grant for the proportion of the employees' normal hours that they are not working. Employers must pay the employees for the hours that they do work. When making the claim, employers will be required to report the data on the contractual hours, actual hours worked, and furlough hours. So you will need to break that down. There is no minimum period of furlough, so there is no minimum amount of time that an employee can take temporary leave. There is a minimum period of 1 week where they are on a flexible plan. The Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme closes to new entrants on the 30th of June. They must have completed that 3-week furlough requirement under the current scheme. So again, just a quick reminder that new employees furloughed must be furloughed for the first time before the 10th of June, and they must have that 3-week period. And again, just a final reminder that employers planning to claim the grant from the 1st of July must have completed their first claim for the period ending of the 30th of June by the 31st of July. So we will be sending out a breakdown of what those key dates are, because they really, really are important. So let's just have a quick look at some of these questions. Charles, thank you very much for your question. So I'm just going to work out how to open this. There we go. So Charles, your question is, my nursery staff will resume in the 3rd week of June this month. They are unfurloughed at that point. Can they go onto the new furlough scheme, as they will only be working part-time hours? So the answer to that is no, they won't, because the new furlough scheme only comes into operation from the 1st of July. So what you might want to think about is, do you want to delay opening the nursery so as it coincides with the 1st of July, so that they can go straight from being unfurloughed into the flexible scheme? You may want to think, well, actually, I'm only going to take a couple of key employees and unfurlough them and have an agreement that from the 15th of June to the 1st of July that they will be working short-time hours, they will be paid for the hours that they work, but they will not receive any pay either from you or the government for those hours that they don't work. Now, that might come across to them as being a little bit unfair, because actually they're worse off than being on the current scheme where they get 80% of their wages, and they'll be worse off than if they are on the flexible scheme. So there is a 2-week period or a 15-day period where you might need to think a little bit differently. As I say, you may want to delay that opening of your nursery. If that's not possible, speak to your staff, make sure that they understand what the position is going to be for that those 15 days where they are going to be working part-time, short-time hours. But do make sure that if they're not going to be paid for those other hours, that you have their agreement, because that is a variation of terms. You cannot not pay them. So get agreement. If you can't get agreement, you will have to pay them for the hours that they're not working. It is one of the sort of pitfalls, but as I mentioned really early on, maybe this might be something that gets changed in the guidance that comes out. So watch this space. It may or may not change, but in the meantime, start thinking about how you're going to be working with those hours. So thank you very much for that question. Charles, you've got another question. I think this ties in with the first question. Just a reminder that the new flexible furlough scheme actually starts from the 1st of July, not the 1st of August as originally announced. So again, that just sort of gives that little bit of extra flexibility. Debbie has sent in another question. Thank you, Debbie. Debbie asks, if we have an employee who has been furloughed since March, can we bring her back from furlough for 3 weeks and then furlough her again? Under the current scheme, absolutely, you can do that. Under the new flexible furlough scheme, yes, you can. You may want to have a look at whether having her on 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, because of course that was the rotation that we had. Is that still going to work for your business going forward? You've got the flexibility and bringing her back slightly differently from the 1st of July. So, give it some thought. If you want to have a sounding board and just get a little bit further advice, give us a call, drop us an email, and we'll be happy to help and support you. So hopefully that answers your question, Debbie. Imogen, thank you very much for sending in your question. Imogen is asking, if I have an employee that has been on furlough from March until June, I think this is going to be the same question, but I'll answer it anyway. If I have an employee who's been on furlough from March until the 1st of June, but not enough work to keep on full-time, can they start part-time for the 1st of July, or do I need to furlough them again from the 10th of June? So just a slight variation there, but I'll just answer that for you, Imogen. So my question to you is why have you taken them off of furlough on the 1st of June? Was there a specific business reason to do that? If there isn't enough work, I would suggest that you re-furlough them until the 1st of July, when you can then get them onto the flexible scheme. If the 1st of June was just a date that you thought that might be an idea, again, you can re-furlough her until the 1st of July, when you can actually start putting them onto the flexible scheme. The flexible scheme only comes into effect from the 1st of July. So again, just have a look at what I'm a little unclear what is the importance of the 1st of June, and it may well be because that's what you had agreed in the first place. So thank you for that, Imogen. We've got Maria. Maria has asked 2 questions, so I'm going to read both of them and then I will answer them. So Maria, thank you very much for your question. The first part of your question is, our staff who are on furlough and have returned to work and received a letter now putting them into employment status again as an employee, So again, if you're going to be taking advantage of the flexible furlough scheme, their status will change slightly. Maria, what I will do is I will make sure I have your details, because, and of course you can watch out for it, because of course the new flexible furlough scheme agreement is going to change. So at the moment, their employment status is they are employed. I'm going to make a big assumption now that they are on short-time working, so they're not getting paid for the hours that they don't work. Of course, if you've got the flexible furlough, you will be able to put them onto them, and then they will be able to claim up, take advantage of claiming, so that they get at least 80% of their wages, which will be more advantageous, I assume, than what they are on at the moment. But I will come back to you with a little bit more information on that. The other part of the question is they are registered under the furlough scheme still. So yes, so anybody who has made a claim, so if you have submitted a claim, whether it's for one period of 3 weeks or whether it's for the whole 12 weeks that we've already passed, as long as a claim has been submitted to HMRC through their portal, you will be able to claim through the to continue to claim through the new flexible furlough scheme, which is why that 10th of June date is so important, because if they haven't been furloughed previously, you can't take advantage of the new flexible furlough scheme. So again, they will still be registered. If you put their name and details through the portal and you made that claim, that is all you need to have done. So the fact that they've come back into work is almost irrelevant, other than that they would be receiving less pay under the flexible scheme. Again, they would get that pay up to that minimum of 80%. So Maria, I hope that has answered your question. Michelle has got a question. So again, thank you very much, Michelle, for your question. I provided I perform adequate consultation and calculate redundancy at 100% of salary, can the notice period of redundancy be served during furlough? Absolutely. Commencing a redundancy process is permitted during furlough. Whether you start that now, whether you do it during the flexible scheme, it is permitted. Any calculations on redundancy pay, statutory redundancy pay, notice pay, holiday pay is on their normal wages. So again, just a reminder that of course statutory redundancy pay is capped. It's calculated on a formula based on length of service, age, and that weekly wage. So yes, again, I'm glad you caveated that, provided you provide adequate consultation. It is 100% of the notice period holiday pay, and it can be done during furlough. So very good question there, thank you. We have a question here from, I'm just going to get rid of some of these so these others can come up to the top. So we have a question from Karen. Karen has asked, can an employee previously on furlough, for example, to the 31st of May 2020, be eligible for the new part-time scheme? Yes, Karen, they can be, because there have been previously a claim has been made for them under the original scheme. So yes, they will be eligible for the new part-time scheme. So a good question there, Karen. Thank you very much for asking. We've got lots of questions here. I can't see how many more there are, but there's certainly loads in my screen. If it's okay with everybody, I will continue for about another 5 minutes and answer as many questions as I can in that 5-minute period. I have got a couple of questions, a couple of other things. So if I keep you hooked and engaged until about 10 past, that would be really great. But don't forget that these questions will be collated. So even if I don't get to answer them, they will come out. So don't feel that I've cheated you. Harjeet has asked a question. Sorry if I have mispronounced your name. So thank you. Oh, brilliant. Thank you for organising this session. It is so valuable. I missed the start. If we have an employee on furlough already, do we need to issue something before the 10th of June if we want to consider the flexible furlough? Absolutely no problem at all. You can get the recording so you won't miss it. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that you're finding this helpful. But yes, you will need to issue a fresh flexible furlough agreement, and again you would need to keep that agreement for 5 years. But again, Haji, I will make sure that this information comes out to you. So thank you for joining us. Again, we've got Kim, who missed the beginning of it. Again, do you need to issue a new letter to the furlough team member? Yes, you will need to do that, and I think I've answered that. I don't want you to feel like I'm cutting you short. Do look out for it. I will make sure that that question is fully answered in our question and answers. Let's just have a look at this next question. So Joanne, right, this is a really good question. So thank you, Joanne, for sending it in. Do all people who are clinically extremely vulnerable receive a letter? Our 0 hours worker only received a text message. Now it varies across the country. Some people got a letter, some people got a text message, some people got nothing at all. So it really was quite localized as to how that shielding information was communicated. Likewise, it has been a complete hit and miss on notifying those who are shielding that they no longer need to shield. So we know that some people have received a letter, some people have received a text message, some people have received nothing at all. So it's not consistent across the nation. So again, it will vary. So I can't give you a specific answer on that, but hopefully that answered. Whether it is a text message or a letter, it's still a valid notification that they are extremely vulnerable. So thank you for answering that, asking that question. I'm going to make this my last question. So Holly, you are our final person for me to ask a question. There are some brilliant questions coming in, and I wish I had the time to be able to do it, but I just want to share some other information with you before we call it a close. Can you make employees take their accrued holiday entitlement during furlough? Absolutely. Holly, you have met someone who said that you can't do that, and you think it can't apply. You can request employees to take their holiday whilst on furlough. There's 2 things that you must do. The first thing is you need to serve notice. So you need to give them you need to give them twice as much notice as the holiday you are requiring them to take. So for example, if you want them to take 1 week's holiday, you need to give them 2 weeks notice. They can take that during their furlough period. And the other point is that they have to receive their normal remuneration for those holiday days. So using my example before, if they're on holiday for a week, they need to get their normal remuneration pay for those holiday days. In other words, 100% of salary. So that's, I have so many questions. I'm just going to be very cheeky. I had 2 questions that were emailed beforehand, and I think it would be unfair not to answer those. So a question from David. If we use the flexible furlough, if we use the flexi furlough scheme for some of our employees to come back for say 20 hours, but ask them to come back on a temporary reduced pay scale, does that impact on the coronavirus job payment top up, and is the furlough paid on a reduced rate? So I think that's quite a complex question, and I will try and answer it for you. So if you are going to be bringing employees back for 20 hours, you will need to pay them for those 20 hours. The government scheme will top it up to top it up for the furloughed hours, so the hours that the employee isn't working, but it's still subject to those caps. Those caps will vary, so as long as the employee receives the minimum of 80% of their wages, you will be fine. You can't go below the 80% of wages. How that is going to be made up is going to shift over the next coming months. So from August, you'll still be able to claim the 80%, but from September, you'll only be able to claim 70%, and of course, October, you will only be able to claim that 60%. So you will need to top it up, but the top up is only to the 80% of original wages with a cap of £2,500. So David, I hope that answers your question, but if not, drop me an email and I'll give you a more specific answer to that. And the last question comes in from Carol. I wonder if you have any insight to annual leave whilst on furlough and making staff redundant. Can you reuse annual leave now and take it as part of notice to save money? Carol, I think I've answered that question, but I'll answer it again for the benefit of everybody else. Is yes, you can use a furlough scheme for notice. You can use a furlough scheme for conducting a redundancy, and you can also use a furlough scheme for commencing that redundancy process. So it is permissible. Notice and holiday, of course, needs to be topped up so that the employee receives 100% of pay. I'm about to turn into a pumpkin, so I do apologize, and I thank you everybody for staying on. It normally gets to this time of the afternoon where all the attendees get bored and start dropping off, but I'm pleased to see that nobody has, or in fact very few of you have. There's still loads of questions in my question box. Look out for that question and answer that will come out in the course of the next day or so. Of course, it's the weekend, so it'll probably be Monday. But I just want to say thank you for attending these webinars. They are so important. I'm so glad to see the feedback in the question box that you find them valuable. So just, I've talked about everything. I've talked about all the steps that you need to go through. We do have some support and guidance coming your way. We have, I am putting on a paid for webinar, which will give you an overview on a redundancy situation. You will be able to participate in small groups, so we'll have a small number of people, so we will be able to have that interaction. You will have a workbook that you will be able to have with that. Hopefully you'll be able to go away and you will be able to think on what are your next steps. We also have, so that's one package and one bit of support available to you. We also have our coronavirus crisis package. Now our coronavirus crisis pass, put my teeth in, coronavirus crisis package is specifically designed for you, for your organization, for whatever you need to do, however long it's going to take. So by and large, if you're going to be carrying out a redundancy process, that may take anything up to 3 months, depending on how long you need to start with consultation. There are prescribed consultation periods, depending on the number of employees that you are going to be, taking through the redundancy. I cannot stress enough the importance of getting it right. Having listened to Employment Tribunal President Judge Clark earlier in the week, they are anticipating an increase, a significant increase in unfair dismissal claims. Please don't get it wrong. It is really not worth it. You have the support, you have the guidance available to you. Yes, it may cost you, in the short term, but I promise you it will save you money in the long term. You don't have to use us. I will absolutely advise you to get legal advice, get HR support if you are going to be going down a redundancy route, because the costs of, you can go to a solicitor who will be able to charge you. Those fees will soon escalate, so I apologize if I'm talking to any solicitors in the room. They charge on an hourly rate. That will very quickly escalate up and will be quite costly. Again, you can use a business consultant who may be able to help you and support you, but they may not have the HR and employment law expertise to keep you on the right side of the law. Make a decision to protect your business. HR for UK have the perfect solution for you to be able to help you, to give you the handheld support and guidance. I know a number of people who are on this webinar today have signed up for our coronavirus package. The early feedback that we've had is it's the best decision that they've made, making sure that they have that handheld support. They know somebody who's going to go through the journey with them, because it is a journey, and having someone who understands the difficult and challenging decisions they have to make in this time makes that decision making so much easier. So please, don't try and do it on your own. I'm not saying it for me, I'm actually saying it for you. There is help. Make sure that you take advantage of that help. So our coronavirus package, you can find out some more information about it on our website. So just a reminder, www.hrforuk.com. If you want to drop me an email, it's info@hrforuk.com. Or if you want to give me a call, that telephone number is 01455 444 222 and ask to speak to me. And you'll be pleased to know that's the end from me. Just a reminder that we have webinars every Friday between 3 and 4. Next week, we've got some guest speakers coming on. You've heard me talk about health and safety, the COVID-19 risk assessment. I'm getting a health and safety expert to come in and join us. Lucy Welsh will be joining us to be answering all those health and safety questions. We are also going to be having Anna Harrington join us. Anna Harrington is an expert in occupational health who will be able to help you understand any concerns that an employee may have. Both Lucy and Anna have got experience second to none. We use both of them to help and support our clients. And you know, the feedback that we've had has been really great in how they have been able to support businesses with these sort of niche, I say niche, really specialist areas. So I look forward to having you join me next week while we have our special guests with us. Just a reminder that communication will go out, a recording of this webinar will go out. And once again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to me, and have an amazing weekend. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.